The problem, my dear friends, was never the tutors. Hold on to that for a moment. When I first heard this story, from someone who was there and had no reason to embellish, my first instinct was probably the same as yours. 14 tutors, 14 in 3 years. Surely the boy must be a terror. Surely the house must be unmanageable. Surely there is some obvious explanation that makes 14 departures make sense. There wasn't. The boy, Master Tobias Pelham, 12 years old, heir to the earldom of Whitmore and to Witmore Hall, which sat on 3,000 acres in the north of England, and was, by every account, exceptionally beautiful and exceptionally cold in February, was not the problem. He was bright, actually, curious in the way that makes good teachers lean forward rather than back. He asked questions that were sometimes inconvenient and occasionally unanswerable, which is the precise quality in a student that separates the teachers who stay from the teachers who eventually find a reason to leave. The problem was his father. Dorian Pelham, the Earl of Whitmore, was 37 years old and had been managing Witmore Hall alone for 4 years, since the death of his wife, with the focused and somewhat excessive control that grief sometimes produces in men who do not know what else to do with it. He was not a bad father. He was not a bad man. He was, however, a man who had decided somewhere in the last 4 years that the only reliable thing in the world was his own judgment, and who had arranged his household accordingly. This worked reasonably well in most areas of estate management. It did not work at all with tutors. What Lord Whitmore did, and he did not know he was doing it, which is the most important part, was this. He hired excellent tutors, observed them for exactly long enough to form opinions about their methods, and then began quietly and with total confidence to undermine those methods. Not cruelly, not deliberately. He would stop by the schoolroom to check on Tobias and stay 20 minutes to correct the tutor's explanation of a mathematical concept. He would send notes suggesting the history curriculum move faster or slower or in an entirely different direction. He would inform the current tutor at dinner that the previous tutor had done it differently and that the previous method had seemed, to him, more effective. He did not notice that he was doing any of this. His household steward, a composed and patient man named Mr. and the unmistakable air of a woman. Soames, who had been with the family since before the late Countess, and who had over 4 years developed communicating an entire opinion through the angle of one eyebrow, had stopped offering commentary on the tutor situation after the 9th departure. Not because he had run out of commentary. Mr. Soames had never run out of commentary in his life, but because he had identified the nature of the problem and concluded, with the pragmatism of a man who had survived 4 years of Lord Whitmore's management, that commentary was not the tool that would solve it. He was waiting for a different tool. The 15th candidate arrived on a Thursday morning in October. Her name was Miss Audra Finch. She was 28 years old, the daughter of a country clergyman from Derbyshire, and she came with references that were, Mr. Soames would later say, the best he had read in 30 years of reading them. She had taught at a small school for 7 years before it closed. Every letter said a version of the same thing. She was exceptional, she was patient, she was the kind of teacher whose students did not merely learn the subject, but came to understand why the subject mattered. Mr. Soames had found her through an agency in London, and when he submitted her name to Lord Whitmore, he included a brief note. "I believe this one may be worth your full attention." Lord Whitmore read the note, read the references, and set them down with the moderate optimism of a man who has been disappointed 14 times and has learned to keep his expectations at a reasonable altitude for the 15th. Miss Finch arrived at exactly the appointed hour, not merely on time, but with the specific quality of someone who considered punctuality a form of respect, not a symptom of nerves. He conducted the interview in the library. He was 6 sentences into his description of the position, the scope of Tobias's current education, the gaps he had identified, the curriculum he had in mind, when Miss Finch said, quietly, and with the directness of someone who has decided to say the true thing and is fully prepared for what follows. "My lord, may I ask you something before you continue?" He stopped. He looked at her. She was looking back at him with a steadiness that was not rudeness and not aggression. It was the steadiness of someone who had something to say, and had made the decision to say it cleanly. "Go on," he said. "How many tutors have you had in the last 3 years?" He told her, 14. She nodded once, in the way of someone receiving information they had already suspected. "And why did they leave?" "Some I dismissed, some resigned." "Why did you dismiss them?" "Their methods were not producing results." "Were their methods wrong?" He paused. "Not always." "Were some of their methods right and producing results when you dismissed them?" The library was quiet. Outside the tall windows, October was doing what October does in the north of England, which is to go about its business with considerable grey indifference to whatever is happening inside. Lord Whitmore said after a moment, "What is your point, Miss Finch?" She folded her hands in her lap, not nervously, with the composed and deliberate quality of someone organizing their thoughts. "My point, my lord, is that 14 tutors in 3 years is not a pattern that comes from the tutors. That many departures, that quickly, suggests something in the structure of the position itself, and I would rather understand that structure before I agree to step into it." Not one of the previous 14 had said anything like this. He had interviewed them all in this library. He had described the position 14 times, refining the description with each iteration, making it more precise, more comprehensive. He had become, by the 14th interview, extremely good at describing a position that, it was now occurring to him, he had never quite been honest about. "Go on," he said for the second time. "The tutors who were dismissed for methods that were not wrong," she said. "What had they done specifically?" He thought about it. They moved at a pace I felt was too slow. Too slow for Tobias, or too slow for you. He looked at her. "A 12-year-old boy," she said, not unkindly, "learns at the pace a 12-year-old boy learns. Good teaching can influence that pace. A father's timeline cannot override it." Lord Whitmore sat back in his chair. He was a man who had not been spoken to this way in 4 years. He was discovering that the experience was, in some quality he could not immediately name, something other than unpleasant. "The ones who resigned," he said. "Why?" She waited. "2 of them told me," he said slowly, "that they could not teach effectively when the curriculum was being revised from outside the schoolroom. They were right." "Yes," he said it without looking away from her. "I believe they were." Miss Finch was quiet for a moment in the way of someone who has made a point and is not going to repeat it. Then she said, "My lord, what do you actually want? Not for the position, for Tobias." And that, my dear friends, that right there, was the question no one had asked. 14 tutors, 14 interviews, 2 years of revised curricula, and corrected methods and letters of dismissal and letters of resignation, and not one person had asked him what he actually wanted for his son, what he was afraid of, what the education was for. He looked at the woman across the desk from him and thought, "She has been in this room for 9 minutes. I want him to be able to think," he said. She waited. Not to recite, not to pass examinations, to actually think, to understand why things are true, not just that they are, to ask questions and know how to find the answers himself. He stopped. He had not said this out loud before. He had not quite known it before. "I lost his mother 4 years ago. He was 8. And what I am afraid of," he said this, with the careful honesty of a man who does not say such things easily, "is that he will grow up in a house with a father who is very good at managing an estate and very poor at teaching him anything that actually matters." The library was very still. Miss Finch said, after a moment, "That is what I would teach him." Lord Whitmore looked at her. "When can you start?" Something moved through her expression, the briefest, most carefully managed moment of relief, gone as quickly as it came. "Monday," she said, "if that suits." "Monday suits. I have one condition." She waited. "You will tell me," he said, "if I am doing it again, undermining you, revising the curriculum, stopping by the schoolroom to correct what does not need correcting." He held her gaze. "I need to know when I am doing it, because apparently I have been doing it for 3 years without knowing it, and I need someone who will tell me." Miss Finch considered him for a moment, with the assessing quality of someone deciding whether the request was genuine. She decided it was. "Yes," she said, "I will tell you." She started on Monday. "And if you have been with me here at Moonlight, at Marlowe for any time at all, my dear friends, you already know that the story does not end there. It never ends there. Pull your chair a little closer, because this is the part that matters most. Now, where were we? She started on Monday, and Lord Whitmore stayed out of the schoolroom for exactly 4 days. This was, Mr. Soames observed with the neutral expression of a man who had anticipated 3, better than expected. On Friday he walked past the schoolroom door and heard his son laughing. Not the polite, managed laughter of a boy performing enjoyment, the real kind. Sudden, surprised, the kind that comes when something is genuinely funny or genuinely delightful or entirely unexpected. He stopped in the hallway. From inside, he heard Miss Finch say in the patient and entirely unbothered tone of someone who had planned for this, "Now explain to me why it's funny. Because the reason it's funny is the same reason it's historically significant, and once you understand that, you will never forget the date." Lord Whitmore stood in the hallway for 2 minutes, listening. Then he went back to his study. He did not go into the schoolroom. He considered this, afterward, a modest triumph. The weeks settled into a shape. Tobias began, in the 2nd week, to come to dinner with opinions, not recited facts, opinions about things he had read, questions he was working through, conclusions he had arrived at, and was not sure about and wanted to think aloud. Lord Whitmore sat across the dinner table from his 12-year-old son and listened, genuinely listened, to a boy who was learning to think. He found, in a way he had not expected and could not have predicted, that it was the best dinner conversation he had had in 4 years. On the Friday of the 3rd week, he wrote Miss Finch a note. It said only, "The dinner conversations are different. Thank you." She wrote back, "He has been thinking about the question you asked him last Tuesday, the one about what kind of man he wants to be. I did not put that question in the curriculum. You did. That is worth knowing." He read the note twice. He had asked Tobias that question at dinner, offhandedly, in the way parents ask questions they do not expect to go anywhere. It had apparently gone somewhere. He had not known it had gone anywhere. She was telling him because she thought he should know. He thought, 14 tutors, and none of them told me this. He wrote back, "I had not realized the question mattered to him." She wrote, "That is what children rarely tell us directly. They show us instead, if we know where to look." The correspondence became a pattern, brief, clear, purposeful. She would write on Wednesdays a summary of the week's progress, the things that were working, the things that needed adjustment, and always precisely one observation about Tobias that Lord Whitmore would not have seen on his own. He would respond. She would act on the response or note that she had already acted. It was, he found, the most useful professional communication he had engaged in for years. It was also, he began to understand around the 5th week, not entirely what he was reading it for. He was reading it, he understood one Wednesday evening in November, because of how she thought. The specific quality of it, the way she would present a problem and its context and its solution in 3 sentences, without padding, without seeking approval, without hedging. Then, on a Thursday of the 6th week, he noticed that the hallway on the 2nd floor had a different arrangement of the framed botanical prints. Someone had moved them from chronological order to botanical family, which made considerably more sense given the series, and which he had been looking at for 12 years without seeing that it did not. He asked Mr. Soames. Mr. Soames said, with the perfectly calibrated expression of a man who is not going to make too much of this, that he believed Miss Finch had rearranged them on a Wednesday afternoon when the rain had kept her indoors. Lord Whitmore looked at the prince for a long moment. Then he went back to his study. He was aware, and I want to be clear, my dear friends, that he was self-aware enough to be aware of this, that the interest he was developing was not entirely professional. He was also aware that she was in his employ, that there was a significant difference in their positions, and that the situation had the potential to become complicated in ways that would not be fair to her. He thought about it carefully, which was what he did with things that mattered. He found her on a Saturday morning in the side parlour, reading by the window, with the focused and unhurried attention she brought to everything. She heard him come in and looked up. Lord Whitmore. Miss Finch. He came in, the botanical prince. She looked at him steadily. I should have asked before I moved them. I apologize. No. He looked at the window, then at her. They make more sense now. The arrangement was wrong for 12 years, and I never saw it. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at her book. The series needed a logic. Chronological was arbitrary. Botanical family is how you actually learn to see the difference between them. He was quiet for a moment. Do you read botany? She looked up. Some, natural history mostly. Some philosophy when it's honest. Some fiction when it earns it. What makes fiction earn it? The question was outside what he usually asked. She knew it. She looked at him with the assessing steadiness he had first encountered in the library. The look of someone deciding what the question actually was. When it tells the truth about something that's hard to say directly, she said. When you finish it and understand something you didn't have words for before. He nodded. He had thought the same thing many times, and had never said it in quite those words. The botanical series in the East Parlour is the same artist. Different specimens, you might find it worth looking at. She considered him for a moment. Thank you. He left the parlour. He did not immediately return to his study. He stood in the hallway, the rearranged hallway, the one that finally made sense, and thought about the library interview and the 9 minutes and the question she had asked that 14 people before her had not thought to ask. He addressed it the way he addressed things that needed addressing. Directly. He found her in the schoolroom on a Tuesday afternoon, after lessons, reorganizing the reference shelf. She heard him and turned. My lord. Miss Finch. He came in. I want to say something that is outside the professional scope of this conversation. She considered him with the same steadiness she always had. You have said several things outside the professional scope in the last 2 weeks. I know. He did not look away from her. I find that the Wednesday reports, I read them more carefully than is entirely about Tobias. She went very still. I am aware, he said, of the position we are each in and the distance between them, and what it would mean for that distance to matter in the way I am suggesting it might. I am not saying this to create a difficulty for you. I am saying it because I have been not saying it for 3 weeks, and the not saying it is requiring more effort than I am accustomed to applying to silence. She looked at the window for a moment. November was doing the same thing October had done, proceeding with cool indifference to whatever was happening inside. It does not create a difficulty, she said finally. No? No. She turned back to the shelf. It creates a question. What question? What you intend to do with it, she said. The interest. He thought about this carefully. I intend to continue exactly as I have been. To read the correspondence, to stay out of the schoolroom, to note when the hallway prints have been reorganized, to ask about botany on Saturday mornings. And to stop, he said, pretending that the noting is entirely professional. She looked at him over her shoulder. That is a very measured intention. I am working within constraints. The constraints being the position. The constraints being your comfort in this house, which comes before everything else on my list. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I will tell you something. He waited. I took this position, she said, because I had been in 2 situations before this where I did not correct things that needed correcting, because correcting them felt risky, and staying quiet felt safe, and the quiet kept costing me things I did not realize I was losing. She paused. I decided, before I walked into that library in October, that I was not going to do that again, whatever the cost. The cost being the position. The cost being the position. She turned to face him fully. I am telling you this because the same principle applies here. I am not going to manage something real into silence, because the management is convenient. He held her gaze. What are you not going to manage into silence? She said, with the same direct and unhesitating quality she had brought to the library 9 minutes in. The fact that the interest, as you have called it, is not moving in one direction only. The schoolroom was very quiet. From down the hall, faintly, came the sound of Tobias in his room, doing something that involved considerable enthusiasm, and at least one book being dropped on the floor. Lord Whitmore looked at the woman in front of him. The woman who had told him the truth in 9 minutes, when 14 people before her had not, who had rearranged the botanical prints and the reference shelf, and, in some way he could not fully account for yet, the shape of his evenings and the texture of his thinking. He said, Come and have dinner with me on Thursday, not as the tutor. As the person who reorganized the hallway and is right about natural history and told me the truth in 9 minutes when I had spent 3 years not hearing it. She was quiet for a long moment. The household will notice, she said. Yes. It will raise questions. Yes. You are not concerned. I am concerned, he said, about the right things in the right order. You are considerably higher on that list than the household's questions. She looked at the reference shelf. She had alphabetized it, and then he could see changed her mind and reorganized by subject instead, which was better. Thursday, she said, at 7. At 7, he agreed. He left the schoolroom. He thought, Thursday, he thought, that is 2 days, he thought. I have waited considerably longer than 2 days for considerably less. He was right about that. Thursday dinner became Thursday dinners. This was not announced. It simply became the shape of things, the way things that are right become the shape of things, without formal declaration, through the accumulation of evenings that work. They talked about Tobias, not the curriculum, but Tobias as a person, the boy who was becoming someone specific and interesting right in front of them. She saw things Lord Whitmore missed. He knew things about the boy she hadn't had context for yet. What the 2 perspectives produced in combination was something neither of them had alone. They talked about the estate. She asked questions that identified the thing underneath the thing he'd said. He found himself explaining problems the way he explained things he was actually thinking about, rather than things he had already decided. She pushed back when the reasoning had a gap. He found he did not mind. He found, in fact, that he was working better. They talked about books. She had read widely and specifically, and with strong opinions about what was worth reading, and her opinions were almost always right. She lent him a volume on natural philosophy in the 3rd week. He read it and returned it Thursday with 3 pages of notes. She read the notes and said, without looking up, You disagree with page 47. Page 47 is wrong, he said. Yes, she set the notes down. I wanted to see if you would find it. He looked at her. You lent me a book with an error in it to see if I'd catch the error. I lent you a book that is very good except for page 47, and I wanted to know whether you read for agreement or for understanding. Which is it? You read for understanding. People who read for agreement miss the error because they want the book to be right. Lord Whitmore looked at her across the dinner table. He thought, I have sat at this table for 4 years. It has never felt like this. On the Thursday of the 11th week, he said, at the end of the evening, I want to talk about something. She waited. Not about Tobias, not about the estate, about the shape of things. She was very still. The Thursday dinners, he said, are not what I hired you for. No, she agreed. They are not the dinners of an employer and an employee. No. They are the dinners of. He stopped. He was not a man who lost words. He had spent 4 years being precise and controlled because precision and control were the tools he had for managing a world that had become unmanageable. He found now that he was struggling. They are the dinners, she said quietly, of 2 people who have found that the other one is genuinely worth the time. He looked at her. Yes. And you want to talk about what that means. I want to ask you something, he said. And I want to ask it honestly, because I have not been honest enough about several things for several years. I have been learning, slowly, from someone in this house, that honesty at the start is cheaper than correction later. She held his gaze. Stay, he said. Not as Tobias's tutor, not as my employee, as, he stopped, started differently, as the person who rearranged the botanical prints and found the error on page 47 and told me the truth in 9 minutes when I had been waiting 3 years to hear it, as that person, in this house, with us. She looked at the table, the good china, the candles that had been lit every Thursday for 11 weeks, the 2 chairs that faced each other across a table that had been set for one person for 4 years. You are asking me to marry you, she said. Eventually, he said, first I am asking you to stay. The rest follows from the staying. The staying and the marrying seem connected. They are connected. I want to be clear about what I am asking. She was quiet for a long moment. The house was quiet around them, settled, running, the way a house sounds when it is properly cared for. Tobias was asleep upstairs. The fire had come down to embers. She said, I corrected you in the library. 9 minutes in. You hired me for it. I hired you because it was the truest thing anyone had said to me in 3 years. She looked at him. He looked back. She said, yes. He breathed. She said, the position description will need to be revised. He said, Mr. Soames can handle it. She said, Mr. Soames has been listening from the hallway since October. He will be insufferable. He said, he is already insufferable. This will not meaningfully change that. She smiled. And Lord Whitmore thought, there it is, he thought. I intend to spend a considerable portion of the rest of my life in pursuit of that smile. He was right to think it. It was by any accounting an excellent pursuit. Mr. Soames produced the revised document on a Monday morning and placed it on Lord Whitmore's desk with the composed satisfaction of a man who has been right about something for a long time and is now watching the rightness arrive on schedule. The document read in Mr. Soames's impeccable hand, position of Countess of Witmore, responsibilities to include oversight of Master Tobias's education, Thursday dinners, estate council, and the correction of the Earl as required and at her full discretion. Lord Whitmore read it. He looked up. Mr. Soames looked back with the perfectly neutral expression he had spent 30 years perfecting. Not a word, said Lord Whitmore. Of course, my lord. A pause. Shall I file it with the household records? File it, said Lord Whitmore. Mr. Soames filed it. Audra, who was the Countess of Whitmore now, which the county was still processing with the collective energy of a community that had not expected it and was not quite sure what to do with it, was in the east parlour when Lord Whitmore came to find her. She was looking at the botanicals on the east wall, the one he had mentioned on a Saturday in November, which she had looked at then and was looking at again now, because, as she had told him, the second looking was when you actually saw it. She turned. He showed her the document. She read it. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. The specific, private, contained version of amusement that he had been cataloguing since October, the one that Tobias had, last week, described to a bewildered Mr. Soames as the way she looks when father says something she already knew. "Mr. Soames," she said. "Mr. Soames," he confirmed. She looked at the document again. At her full discretion, she read, "His words. They are the right words." She handed it back. The correction should be available when it's needed, not scheduled. Agreed. She turned back to the botanical series. He came to stand beside her. She said without turning, "The third print in the second row is misattributed. I looked it up. It is a different species than the label says." He looked at the third print in the second row. "You have been here 4 months," he said, "and you found an error that has been on this wall for 30 years. "I look carefully at things," she said. He looked at her. He thought about 9 minutes in the library. He thought about 14 before her who had not. He thought about a boy laughing in a schoolroom, and a hallway that finally made sense, and a page 47, and a Wednesday note that told him his own question had mattered to his son. He thought, "I have been surrounded for years by things that were slightly wrong, and I had decided they were right because I was the one who had put them there." She had arrived in October and started correcting them, one by one, quietly, the way she did everything, not for credit, not for approval, but because things that were wrong were worth fixing when you had the chance to fix them. He said, "I have been thinking about the library interview." She turned to look at him. "You think about it frequently." 9 minutes, he said. "It explains everything that followed." She held his gaze. Outside the east parlor windows, February was going about its business, grey, unhurried, and considerably colder than October. She said, "Yes, it does." She went back to the botanical series. He stayed where he was, beside her, looking at the third print in the second row. The one that was wrong, the one she had found, the one that would be corrected now because she was here and she looked carefully at things. And thinking about the Earl he had been before October, and the man he was now, and the specific, somewhat astonishing distance between them. The house was quiet, running, settled. The boy upstairs was doing something loud and enthusiastic that was very probably educational. The document was in the files as required and at her full discretion. And the rest, my dear friends, the rest was simply the rest of their lives, which turned out to be, by every measure that actually mattered, the most interesting position either of them had ever held.